the Chief Executive and I were hot-footing it back from London Councils, where the Leaders Committee of the West London Alliance was meeting. So we will get into business. Can I have any apologies for absence? I think I've got Councillor Nagpal joining online. Yes, so that's fine. Urgent matters. Matters to be considered in private. My usual caution that if you do wish to refer to anything in confidential papers, please indicate before doing so, as we'll have to clear the gallery and turn off the live stream, which we would like to avoid doing. But if you insist, then please do notify me beforehand. Are there any declarations of interest? There are none indicated. Are Cabinet content to agree the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you. There are no appointments to subcommittees or to outside bodies that I'm aware of, so we will begin the fuller agenda with the 0 to 19 Health Child Programme HCP service recommissioning contract, and I believe that is Councillor Newstep. Oh no, it's Councillor Blackett, of course. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Cabinet is asked to agree a procurement exercise to go out to tender for our 0 to 19 Healthy Child Programme.
I have not been indicated of any request to speak on this item. As always, it's the beginning of a procurement process, so no doubt it'll come back for a future key decision. If we're happy to therefore agree the recommendations in the report. Agreed. Thank you. So we now move to item number 8, the approval of the draft West London Waste Plan for Regulation 18 consultation. Councillor Manro.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is like our local plan, a Reg 18. It's a sub-regional planning sort of consultation at Regulation 18 stage. It's all the local authorities in the West London Waste Alliance, including OPCD, who also are now members because they have parts of Brent and Ealing in their purview. It is the first stages around how we plan for waste facilities through the next 15 odd years. All the boroughs have to do this through their planning authorities, and together they will then wait for, as they do the consultation, wait for the views to come forward around, the stuff in the plan. And then there'll be a 19, and then it'll go through examination, which is our local plan. So this is the early stages, but it has to be done this month because all the other local authorities are doing it, so they can go out to consultation.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the key point there being that this is the same consultation that's being done by all of the member authorities, including Ealing, but not limited, of course, to us. Councillor Driscoll, did you want to add anything before we go to questions from opposition?
Yes, so from the West London Waste Authority's viewpoint, it's a whole system assessment of the capacity for waste in the area. So it looks at capacity across the whole of the 6 boroughs and how we anticipate our waste commitments being met. We think we have capacity within that provision to meet all the predictions for the future. So we're in actually quite a solid position compared to other authorities and other waste collection and waste disposal authorities. So, I think it's possible we're in a positive position here, and this allows us to plan future planning developments with waste provision in mind.
Okay, thank you. There is a question from members of the opposition. Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. In paragraph 22, item B, it relates to the Stirling Road site as one of the table there. There's obviously been some changes to that site over the past year compared to what was there 3 or 4 years ago. If you reverted back to what was there before, does this proposal, if it goes ahead, the recommendation stop any changes on site at that particular site if the actual council wanted to alter what happened on that site?
Sorry.
On the point on safeguarding, the principle of safeguarding might come to you, Councillor Manro, but let me go to Councillor Driscoll first on its intended use.
Yeah, so our intended use is reactant. So we are concluding the sort of legal lease arrangements and that. So it will be progressing, and that's for the foreseeable future how that will be going. So we have no plans to dispose of that site, and it will be used as part of that circular economy, which is in itself part of waste management. So it will still be within that sort of broader umbrella of waste and recycling and our ambitions to develop in that area. So there's absolutely a commitment to use that site for the foreseeable future with the reactor.
And of course, it's probably a good, helpful point, therefore, to remind all of our watchers that should you wish to use a site, of course, you can use any of the sites within the West London Waste Authority, so including ones just over the road in Old Oak Park Royal. Councillor Manray.
So in terms of planning terms, it's still designated as a waste site, has not changed. And we would have to designate it through a proper planning process if we were minded to change the designation of that site. So that site is still part of a waste authority's sites, and it's not. There's no plans for us to de-designate that site as of yet. And if there was, there would be a proper process we would have to follow.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any more questions or points from members of Cabinet? If not, then can I ask that you refer to the recommendations in the report and ask that they're agreed. Thank you very much. We now move to item number 9, EV charging strategy. Councillor Driscoll.
So the strategy looks at what we're planning to do with EV charging. I mean, our aim was initially, when we started off EV charging, was the faster, more rapid chargers, and we're moving towards more lower cost lamp column charging. We've got that aim. We have just a tad under 1,100 at the moment, and we should be deploying more EV charging across the borough. A positive news is that Ealing took over the leadership of the Levi Consortium for West and North London, and that secured a multi-million, I think it was well over £6 million for the participating councils, and that will help us to aim towards a further 1,000 lamp column chargers, which are lower, and they would be dedicated charging points across the whole borough, so it wouldn't be isolating any particular area. So that is a really positive outcome. The strategy looked at that holistic approach to transition. There is a reference to gully charging, so I'll put that out there now. I'm probably expecting some questions on that, which I'm more than happy to explain about some of the proposals that are more recent and some of the decisions. But it's fair to say that the EV charging points being part of our curbside infrastructure and how we impact and what we do with the curbside are one part of a consideration about a wider use of the public realm. So we shouldn't look at this in isolation, because if we do, we're failing to think about the whole user groups and the whole resident groups that are entitled to use pavements and have surety of access. So we will be coming back, and it's mentioned in the report about coming back with our curbside strategy, and that will come forward next year. And then we can look at things in the totality and look at how we stand with some other sort of regulations changes that are coming on board, and make sure we're informed by actual changes and informed rather than anticipated future changes. So I'm anticipating some questions, and I'm happy to go through details.
Yeah, and I would just sort of say before I move to members of the opposition, this is a well litigated issue that's been subject of lots of political discussion at full council, I think now for 3 consecutive full councils. I don't intend on having a political debate at Cabinet. I want us to be focused on the details contained within the report. So if they do relate to those issues, you'll forgive me if I do move you more directly onto questions. But let me go first to Councillor Malcolm. You're on the room, so you get to go first.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions that relate to the same element. One is paragraph 3 in the vision. In the vision, it doesn't use the word low cost, although it does mention it obviously later on in the report. Why do you not think low cost should be a real key factor given the cost of living crisis which many people are in at the moment? And then linked to that, what do you advise on the likely cost per unit of a low cost lighting column is going to be? Because obviously people are making the comparison of charging from their home against the current facilities, which are massively more expensive. So can you give a bit of an outline what we might see as residents?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I know we've been over this before, but it's a fair question. So let Councillor.
So yeah, I mean, our whole plan is to move towards lamp column charging, which is at a lower cost. So by the very nature of having that as our aim, we are trying to get the widest available option for the widest availability group of people rather than private charging points. So by its very nature, it's lower cost. In terms of what is lower cost in terms of an actual physical amount, I mean, that's the marketplace and the charging place. There could be changes in regulation, national taxation. There could be all sorts of changes that might be in the pipeline that are outside of our scope. So we can't set what's the lower threshold because we are not setting the charging point there. So you're asking for me to set a benchmark of what is low when we don't set that benchmark of charging points. And it's about electricity prices and where they may flex in the market, which is beyond my control and probably most folks in the room here. So it's difficult to answer that in specifics because it's not within our control, but we are going towards lower charging lamp columns. By the very nature, they are lower than the rapid charger models.
Okay, Councillor Gallant.
Thank you very much, Chair. Assume you can hear me. Can I just
Yeah,
ask
go ahead.
So within the report, the cost of a pavement gully is cited as £3,000 plus, with added charges for maintenance and insurance, and then that's leading to a payback period of 6 years. I mean, do you agree that this estimate is actually disputed, and actually, I mean, it's twice as much as a standard drop curb? One question. If I could ask, it says also, it says gullies can have a significant impact on the feel and safety of pavements for residents walking or wheeling. Now, I mean, which residents have complained about it? Because obviously it hasn't yet been rolled out in Ealing. So that's effectively rather jumped the gun.
I'll go so if you could go on mute, Councillor Gallant, with a bit of feedback in the room.
Okay, so yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Driscoll.
So yeah, the figure you mentioned there about the cost of gullies, that would be definitely at the upper end. There's probably a range, and it depends on location and circumstance in the pavement. So that would be at the upper end, the figure you mentioned there, but the cost of installation isn't insignificant, and typically it's around about the £1,500 mark in a lot of boroughs. Some borough, well, it's not permitted development, so would require planning. So that in itself would be about 500 plus for planning in itself. So that would be a cost in itself. And if you add on the cost of actually adding the EV charging point for the home, then that's a further cost. There may be grant assistance with that, but there's still a further cost. And then there's other costs for electricals, for earthing as well, potentially. So I think that higher point there encompasses all those costs, not just what you often see as for £1,500 for the pavement crossover, but for the planning, for the electrical works and so on. So it's looking at that whole global figure. And the second question, if you want to give me just a bit of a reminder, and that would be helpful, was it the number of complaints? May I
write, Chair?
Yeah, it was related to the number of complaints and direct contact from the president.
So we wouldn't have complaints about gully charging in Ealing because we don't have gully charging. Looking at other councils to see how they've assessed gullies, there's scant substantive reports. Bromley is probably the closest to that, but then in their trial they were hoping to have 8 gullies installed across the whole borough. They had 5 people pull out of their 12 down to 7. They had another person put in. Their report, when it talks about the impact of gullies, I wouldn't say was extensive. It gave a couple of bullet points about a few key issues and not much. But there are a whole, anybody pretending that gullies can be your panacea for charging is just not understanding the picture. If you've got a lamp column, that can impact whether you get a gully. If you've got a tree root and a growing, and you've got a tree in your, close by, that will impact whether you can get a gully. There's issues about earthing as well. There's issues about your road markings. One council doesn't allow gullies next to a speed ramp. So there's a whole host of issues why gullies might not be installed. But we wouldn't have complaints because we don't have gullies. But we are conscious that when we do our curbside strategy, we'll look at the whole usage to make sure that anything about that's going to be used on that curbside will be considered in its full entirety about all users using the curbside, and that everybody's given that fair chance and consideration. So that's our intention, and that curbside strategy will be next year.
Any more points or questions? Look, I understand where the questions come from on this, slightly cynically, I think, from the political opposition, but sort of genuinely from members of the public who absolutely want to be on board with the transition from polluting petrol vehicles to electric vehicles. And, you know, we as an administration are absolutely committed to help that transition and to make that as cheap and as accessible for absolutely everybody. The fundamental challenge, as everybody in London and anybody in an urban location is experiencing, is that when in a place like London, you have lots of terraced houses, when they were built in the Victorian and Edwardian era to the average width of about 4 meters, the very fact that the average width of a car in the UK is 4.4 meters means that it is next to impossible for the council to be able to guarantee that any resident should have reserved parking outside of their terraced house. It is practically not possible, and it is, of course, the reason that we have a lot of parking pressure and have controlled parking zones. And unfortunately, in some communities and some parts of our borough do have a bit of parking rage when people do not feel that they can get access to their property. The cost of a gully charging point is significant. Not every resident in our borough has the ability to simply find £1,500 to £3,000 immediately in their bank balance. And therefore we need to make our infrastructure right across the borough as accessible and as open to everybody. And I think what we've tried to make very clear through the strategy and all the work that Councillor Driscoll is doing on officers, that our priority is to rapidly expand the number of electronic vehicle charging points right across the borough, and doing that at a rate, by the way, that will see us deliver more electronic charging vehicle points than rejection, because we want to lead the market. And perhaps get us into a situation where we do have saturation, and it then does incentivise those providers to think very carefully about reducing their fees for access to energy and to the grid. Ultimately, that is the only way forward. Oil will one day run out, and we need to be prepared for a situation where petrol cars are off the streets and we're providing the infrastructure that we need. So, you know, I appreciate that certain people want to, as they have done already. In fact, I probably suspect, Gary, that the press release has already been issued and is being published as we speak. But that's certainly what there is. So we will continue to do as much as we can to help that transition. Are there any more points or questions on the report? Okay, so with that being in mind, if Cabinet are content, if I could direct you to the recommendations in the report and ask that they're agreed. Let's now move to the 2025-26 Q2 Budget Monitoring Report. Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. In the scheme of things, a relatively quiet quarter in terms of change. For I think second quarter running, the net outturn is a small surplus. I mean, tiny in the context of the overall budget that we run, but I think testament to the skill that and enormous efforts that officers across the organisation have made in order to keep what is still an extremely challenging situation under control. Slight negative movement in adults, which reflects a slippage in the time frame expected for the delivery of savings, some of those into the next financial year, and in children's, where we continue to come under enormous pressure, particularly in the area of residential care, the cost of which I think those of us who get to see the figures we know is eye-watering on occasions, and not readily plannable. I think the other big challenge represented across what am I about to say? Sort of like AI is second guessing, but yeah, the other big challenge which any council which runs education services faces is around the dedicated schools grant, particularly the high needs block, where there's been a significant increase in the deficit there, which we're working very hard with the Schools Forum to address, and the government continues to work on its plans to replace the current system, which has, I think, demonstrated itself to be past its sell-by date. But happy to answer any questions.
We do have a question from Councillor Gallant.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. I'm not offering, this is I only take the question in the spirit of collegiality, because I know that the pressures are there, and what I'm saying is, what I'm asking really is, I've obviously noted the overspend and the pressure in adult social care and children's services, which rather dwarfs most of the other services, and I've also noticed the mitigation. Will you not eventually have to deal with the pressure rather than find the mitigation?
It was asked in the spirit. Yeah. Oh, just pop yourself on mute again, please, Councillor Gallant. There's a feedback in the room. Asked in the spirit of collegiality, Steve. Councillor Donnelly, do you want to respond?
Well, philosophically, it's quite a difficult one to get. I'm not sure where dealing with stops and mitigation ends, or the other way around. I mean, much of what we speak of in terms of mitigation represent an attempt to deal with trends, increasing trends in one area, being coped with by reducing spend in other areas. I mean, those are mitigations, but they're also what you call dealing with. At a more direct level, we challenge more than we've ever done before, I think, the necessity to take specific actions regarding specific placements of specific children where we think cost is unreasonable. There have certainly been a lot of reports that in parts of the residential care sector, there have been attempts to overcharge, to take money unnecessarily from councils. In other circumstances, you know, when you do the mental arithmetic around the cost of 2-to-1 24-hour care for a vulnerable young person, actually, even where those two people are paid at minimum wage, it doesn't take long to work out that the costs of such care are enormous. So balancing our absolute responsibility to care for our young people with our absolute responsibility to manage the taxpayers' money responsibly, we tackle these issues from all directions, and dealing with and mitigation are, to me, just two sides of the same coin, Councillor Grant.
And look, you know, these are the fundamental challenges in local government that we've been dealing with for quite some time. And I know, Councillor Gallant, you've been present for each and every one of our quarterly reports that all tell the same story of increasing pressures with diminished resource. And that's certainly the challenge that we've been dealing with the last 14 years. This administration's been doing it with absolute focus on value for money and ruthless efficiency for the taxpayer. You know, we are now starting to see demand bite even beyond that which we are able to successfully manage hitherto to date. And I'll draw your attention to the DSG and the high needs block, which we've been incredibly good at dealing with in comparison to some of our colleagues, not just across London, but nationally. The London Borough of Hillingdon's DSG is overspent by about £78 million. which is, as a council that is proportionally smaller to us in population, both in overall and in children's placements, hugely different to that which we've been able to manage in Ealing very successfully. But of course, it doesn't mean that we still have young people with special educational needs, many of which are incredibly complex, that do place demands on the system. And it's our responsibility collectively. And I don't just say that as an administration. I also look to you, Councillor Gallant, and I look to you, Councillor Malcolm, that we corporately have a responsibility to meet those pressures and to meet those demands. And that is the fundamental driver of our budget strategy, and why often we have to make some tough decisions about reprofiling some of our spending to meet those pressures and to meet those demands, because ultimately that is our responsibility. So we work each and every day, as I know Councillor Donnelly and the wider team, both in finance and across the organisation, to keep a cap as much as we can on demand and pressures. But we have an ageing society. We have more and more young people with more challenging demands, and we will continue to have to live up to those responsibilities. So important context. Are there any more points or questions from the room? I can see, go for it, Councillor Blacker.
I was just going to point, Councillor Gallant, to some of the reforms that are coming through, particularly on children's services. So the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill is kind of coming through, which will end some of the profiteering that Councillor Donnelly mentions. Reforms to social care will have some of the impact that I think Councillor Gallant would like to see. So I'd hope that he supports the Labour government in delivering that. And then, of course, as Councillor Donnelly says, the reforms to the SEND system, which are slightly delayed further than we would have hoped, but I think is a good sign that they're going to be delivered in a way that includes families in the conversation of what those reforms should be. So I just wanted to reassure him that it is not only our responsibility to manage these pressures, we will do so, but there is national action happening from the government that will see some improvement, we hope, in the overall picture. And that refocus after so many years on those very early years and the Best Start funding that started to come through to deliver some of the activity that perhaps has been lost, not just in Ealing over the last 15 years, but across the country, in terms of preventing some of the problems coming through, so that we have more capacity to deal with those more challenging needs that Councillor Mason, you have talked about.
Thank you, Councillor Newstub.
I can't resist also jumping in when I'm talking about adult social care and many of the increased costs that we see. We obviously need to remember that behind every single one of those costs is a human being, and often if we can work, when we talk about dealing with and mitigation, it can seem fairly a brutal way to talk about some of our most vulnerable residents, but actually the work that we do day in, day out is about thinking very carefully about what are the best outcomes for those individuals. Often they are cheaper, often being more attuned to prevention and doing that work upstream is ultimately cheaper, but it's obviously the right thing to do for our residents. So it's a really important context that we remember that we are dealing with incredibly vulnerable people across Councillor Blacker's piece and my own, and that while in the context of this report we look at it in terms of cost, we are more widely focused on ensuring that those residents, within the envelope that we are given and within the parameters of our values, making sure that they are able to live productive and independent lives.
Thank you. I don't see any more indications. So on that basis, thank officers for the update and ask that the report is noted. Agreed. Thank you. Let's then move to the item number 11, the Section 75 Framework Agreement relating to commissioning of health and wellbeing, social care and education services for adults and children. Go for it.
Thank you. So as I set up this next one, this is a really, this is the framework that allows us to effectively co-commission and pool resources between the council and the NHS. It's a very important part of the wider context around the government's prevention agenda, And we will, in all likelihood, be seeing more opportunities for where we can work together to ensure that that our broader understandings of the opportunities around health are understood from a population point of view, but also in terms of what local authorities and the health service can do to work together. So it is very focused on driving better health and social care outcomes for our residents. And it will, in all likelihood, continue to drive ever closer functions that mean that we can integrate more effectively locally and focus absolutely on better outcomes for our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't have any indications to speak from opposition, so I'll look to the room. I see no indications, so I'll ask that you review the recommendations of the report and ask that they're agreed. Thank you. We now move to the termination of the development agreement with Peabody Limited for the Green Southall. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Chair. As you're aware, there were a number of developments over the last 4 or 5 years where, because of the issues around Liz Trust in terms of interest rates, material increases, COVID, many RPs have pulled away from the market in terms of carrying on with the developments that we'd agreed to move forward with. Peabody have moved away from 2 developments, this one and Havelock. So we're now coming to the end and actually moving towards a termination. I won't go into the gold papers, but the reports are very clear in terms of protecting our interest to the council in terms of any cost that we might bear. But I'm not going to go into those numbers. I'm happy to, answer questions if I can without going into private. But the report's very clear that we're moving towards a termination and we've come to an agreement. And I'm asking for delegation to officers to move forward with that termination.
Yeah, and again, I think the important thing being the termination's happening at the request of Peabody with our agreement and with the indemnities that, of course, are listed in the report. I do have questions from the opposition. So, Councillor Malcolm, you're in the room.
Thank you, Chair. One of the aspects here is that in future, with reduced amounts of SIL from examples like this happening, there's going to be less community budgets in the Your Voice, Your Town that are likely to happen. So can you give me a feel for whether that is the case and there'll be lower budgets for that particular area, because it's a side impact of this particular aspect? Do
you have another question, or is that the only one? Yeah, well, of course, we don't currently have SIL. We'd quite like to implement it, but to make available lots more money for community organisations through Your Voice, Your Town. But Councillor Munro, do you want to expand?
I was just going to point out that there was no SIL for this development. Well, currently, but it would have been in development before our SIL would have come into place. So they would have paid the London SIL, and they would have paid 106 monies towards the council's mitigations for that project. But there wouldn't have been any SIL payment to the council for our SIL, because this project would have would have been done before the SIL came in.
And that's probably the appropriate environment to discuss the consequences of the changes in policy to our SIL regime, but that doesn't pertain directly to the report that we're considering. So I think we as always, Cabinet's here to discuss the Cabinet papers, not for a general political discussion about other policy matters. Councillor Gallant.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of questions. As a result of the termination, will the council need to revise down the housing target in the local plan? And secondly, will this event and this termination lead to a review of big development contracts? Could a higher number of smaller projects buffer against all the issues that have been cited, like labour supply, building costs, regulation, and so on? So will we see more smaller projects?
Councillor Munro.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not sure Councillor Gallant quite understands the size of projects. I mean, this was a project for 535 units, which in its definition isn't a large one. We've got others where it's 2,000 units. So basically, smaller projects probably cost more because the fixed costs for each application in terms of planning and other planning issues would actually cause a major increase in cost if you did small projects, as we found out with some of the other projects we've done, the smaller ones. So no, it wasn't particularly a big project. It was just Liz Truss and her interest rate increases and all the problems that the last Tory government administration carried out in terms of national policy, which led to RPs having to withdraw from many projects throughout the country. And we cannot revise down our housing projects. We're not an independent authority. We have targets set for us, and they may be increasing, Councillor Gallant, as you may be aware. So we will have to find other sites and find other development projects and work with landowners to bring forward projects that will deliver the houses that we need. The families that need housing and temporary accommodation don't really care about, you know, how we do it, but they need a home, and it's our job to provide homes for our residents in the borough who are living in substandard accommodation in hotels and bed and breakfast, and that is our #1 priority. So yes, we will move forward with more development, and we will not be revising down our housing targets because it's not in our power to do so. It's the London Plan and national government that sets those targets.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any more comments or questions from members of Cabinet? If there are none, then I'll ask that the recommendations in the report are agreed. With that, I don't know when the next meeting of the Cabinet is, but it'll be next month. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you soon.